Hey, I timed it perfectly.
That's good.
Afternoon, Jason.
You're getting good.
I know, right?
Hey. Hi, everybody.
Hey, we don't usually do this in the afternoon, do we?
No, we don't do it on Friday afternoon either.
End of a long week. This will be fun, right?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Hey, everybody. All right. Hey, everybody. I am Matt Kimball, and I am joined by my friend and colleague, Jason Anderson from More Insights and Strategy. And what are we here to talk about, Jason? Are we here to talk about IT stuff?
Yes, yeah? IT stuff. For sure. What's hot with the IT folks?
What's new? What's new with this new fad called IT and AI? Anyway, hey, welcome to the show. We talk all things IT. Before we get into it, don't take anything we say as financial advice. If you do, shame on you. That's the end of the disclaimer. Just be smart about what we tell you. There are opinions. They're well-formed opinions, but they're opinions nonetheless. Right? Yes, sir. All right. How was your week? Where were you this week, Jason? Were you home or were you away?
I was at the home office making a lot of content and catching up from a lot of stuff on the road. Build was last week. Build was great. Came home, did some stuff. I'm off again next week for a trip. But yeah, it was a good week to kind of get regrounded.
Right on.
Yeah.
And I just got home from Boston yesterday, a wonderful Broadcom event. And today we're going to probably touch on a lot of this stuff, I guess. Let's jump in, huh?
Yeah.
You want to jump in?
Yep. Let's do it.
You got the first one here, my friend.
Okay.
You get some weird thing. Yeah.
So this thing, one of the things I like to do in the summer which is coming up here, is once we have a little bit less travel and people are going on vacations, is to really kind of try to look at the whole industry-wide trend. We spend so much time zoning in on a vendor in a particular week and looking at their stuff. And then the next week we go to another vendor, we look at their stuff. And how do you kind of take all that and turn it into a kind of a stream of consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. And there's some really interesting themes starting to come up and poke through. And really, one of the things that's not necessarily being taken into consideration with all this AI and agentic goodness is the human in the loop. Right. So everybody talks about the human in the loop and how vital the human in the loop is. And we've seen this shift away from AI is going to take your job to, well, maybe it's not going to take your job, from the big players out there, your Sam Altmans and such. But the reality is that it may not take your job, but it's changing your job. Mm-hmm. Right. And we're not really crisp as an industry in terms of talking to the IT customers to what that actually means. So when you get down to it, there's a number of new trends coming out that you need to start to think about in terms of framing up what the expectation is of the worker in your company, right? So if you're an IT person, you have to start looking at things like autonomy with AI, right? So that could be autonomy from like a technology like OpenClaw. You're also seeing the new Fable model from Claude, from Anthropic, Claude Fable. That is a model that's going to be able to run long time processes relatively autonomously. You're starting to see people talk about closing the loop with an agent. So I know, like, if you look at some of the things around application modernization and migration agents, now they're going to be more of a continuously operating kind of architectural drift prevention program. And you're starting to see it on other aspects of IT, like network management, all this other stuff. So there's autonomy, which means, okay, is the business constantly running, or are processes turning into streams, those types of things. The second piece of it is also just, quite frankly, the technology itself and how it's being used and what's going on. I mean, if you are using an agent to write and do research now, you're not really writing anymore. It's more like you're an editor. The writing's being done by the AI, and you're saying to it, no, I don't like the way it's structured. Structure it like this. Or, you forgot this fact, and you need to inject this fact in. Or, I've read it and I don't like it, so let's start from scratch. Those are things that editors do, not writers, right? And when you think of that, it also means that everybody's role is going to change. So as I think about autonomy and I start to think about what people are actually using this stuff for, my question starts to become about the loop, right? Oh, and there's a third thing. Hold on. The third thing is this: scale. You're starting to see solutions scale out, right? So, for example, if you have a sub-agent capability, right, you can spawn an agent to do something in code, right, a coding type of thing, and it can now spawn many different agents underneath it. So instead of basically doing a process in a serial way, like you would do with an AI chat, like we used to do, now it's like I can do something and it can launch multiple things in parallel, and they're all running at the same time. Okay, so how is that being orchestrated? Is the governance and security being on that? As a discrete piece of work, is that able to be cataloged so it can be audited for compliance reasons? All of this stuff is now starting to scale exponentially. All these processes are starting to blow up, and now all of a sudden, not even just from the writer, editor view or the autonomous view, the third view is, how are you keeping track and monitoring all this crap, right? Because our monitoring systems aren't really built for that type of usage. They're built for much more kind of deterministic types of use cases and monitoring types of use cases. So this stuff's all starting to really stress a business, and it's starting to stress an IT company. And you have to really think this stuff through. And what I keep coming back to is, at the end of the day, where are we going to start drawing lines between, and that line being the loop? If you think of the human in the loop, there's this, you think of it as like a line. That's really what's going on. And one of the things I think that I learned through the summer was really that definition is not well managed. That definition isn't necessarily well defined by the vendor. And ultimately, I think it's going to be up to the customer side of things. They're going to have to say, this is how we're going to do it. And then they go to the vendor and say, this is what we expect from you. We don't want this. And you have to start thinking that through. And I think it's ultimately going to come down to your business processes, right? I mean, if you're Walmart, you probably want less humans in the loop because you want everything to be more autonomous, and you want everything to be cheaper, and you want to sell products for less. If you're Nordstrom, you want a premium experience. You still want the human very heavily in the loop. So it's no longer about what the vendor says you can do. It's now about what you say you want. Sure. And you should start to push back on that. And I think that's something that's a real change in the discussion on AI and agentic. For so long, we've just been IT people and just sitting there absorbing all this and trying to take it all in and figure out what to do. Now it's time to push back. And it's time to push back on those folks and say, no, this is how I'm going to run my business. You make the AI work for me, right? And I think that's a really important change that you're going to see heading into the fall and heading into next year. So that's my little rant.
I think even within an org, it's a good rant. You're a good ranter. And I often say about you. I'm like, Jason, he's a ranter.
Yes.
I also think it depends on the function within the organization and the individual. And I think the successful deployments will be the ones where you can dial that human in the loop involvement to the right degree, right? Call it 1 to 10. Jason, maybe, there are some functions where I might want Jason and it could be kind of through a certain function, or it could be doing this function during this time because of some criticality. Where and I think where we're going to see success is where you have the ability to turn that dial up and down, based on needs, based on people, based on use and time, and so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Or even based on the nature of the process itself. I mean, one thing that you might not want to, you may want to be very involved in an agent doing HR related tasks, whereas you might be, because it's dealing with other people's jobs or their compensation or whatever. Whereas to your point, you might want to have less involvement on a decision about where the company picnic's going to be, or what the marketing copy looks like. You might say, well, that's less important to me. I'm going to hand more of that off. So you're right. There's also this variability aspect and that's going to be a very personal set of decisions, right? Based on your role or based upon, your expertise, quite frankly.
Hey, let me ask you though, kind of stepping back, and we have a couple of minutes here. So, stepping back from this specific, how in the loop people will be. Do you see, just kind of looking more broadly, do you see that kind of, in your conversations, do you see that march to autonomy kind of really starting to gain steam, or do you see it kind of still, it's being talked about a whole lot, but reality kind of is a little bit divorced from kind of the vision?
I think it's one of those terms that is, I think it's a term that scares people.
Hmm.
Because it's not necessarily just the whole thing about does this impact my role or my job. I think it also goes beyond that too. Well, where's the trust, right? Where's the, can I actually trust this thing to do this, consistently,
Yeah.
and accurately over time, right? I think that's a really big question mark. I also do think there's an element to this of, this is where I think the vendors are kind of, it would be incumbent upon them to become more declarative about this stuff. And this is something else I'd say. I'd say that it's a little bit tangential to what you asked, is that we are now finally starting to see people trying to differentiate their AI stories from each other.
Hmm.
So literally today, we just dropped a new piece of research I wrote for SAP, who's very much leaning their AI strategy into SAP stuff, meaning they're really focused on the types of data that SAP generates and the types of users who use it. And they're making it, whereas, in the past, some of these application platforms have been more like very homogenized. Like, well, what's the difference between you and these guys and these other guys? So it was very hard to tell, but you're starting to see companies lean into kind of a real perspective and a differentiated point of view. And I think that's going to be good because, to your point, autonomy is going to be one of those topics where they're going to come back and say, this is our comfort level with this. Right now, everybody kind of throws it out as marketing words, but when it's time to get down to brass tacks, some vendors are going to say, now's not the time, right? Yeah. Whereas other vendors are going to be like, let's go for it, right? I mean, I could see maybe, and in some ways, that's kind of what happened with Anthropic and Mythos, right? They recognized that this model had some interesting aspects to it from a cybersecurity standpoint, but that could be as equally as tempting as terrifying, right? So what they did was they started Glasswing and they said, let's go focus this and try to make it better. So that's an example where somebody saw an opportunity to do something autonomously and stepped back and said, oh boy, we better not do this. Right now, I'm not sold that Fable, I can't be sold that a human-based company is going to think of all these edge cases and make a derivative that's safe. I'm a little bit cautious about Fable at this point because I'm not sure. Somebody could think of some other destructive way to use it, and you can't manage for every edge case, but still it's scary. Yeah. But to me, that's another thing, is that I do think that vendors are going to start being more declarative about what they think and where they're at. And I think that that's going to be huge because, like I said, everything's not the same anymore. You can start to point this technology in certain directions to get different results.
Yeah. I think it's funny because I look at this in general, and this is based on some conversations I had this week, and stepping back, and I think there is probably a very good reason for a lot of companies to want vendors to sprint out in front of where the market actually is. Yep. Here's our vision, and I want to capture, those enterprises that are kind of that, see this vision and buy into it and kind of are aligning their spending to that long-term vision. But I think the successful companies in the end, the vendors, are going to be the ones that, even if they sprint out, they're still walking alongside their customers. Going back to that dial, right? It's like, I might have all these capabilities, but you, Mr. or Miss Customer, you might not be ready. And I want you to be able to utilize, this autonomous solution to the level of autonomy, from 0 to 5, anywhere in that range. I want you to choose kind of where you set that dial. And when you're ready to go from 2 to 3, click the dial. Go to 3, go to 4, go to 5.
I think that's also, to your point, I think that's why one of the biggest fashion statements of the spring and summer was all these companies announcing their FDE programs, their forward deployed engineer programs, which, that topic and concept has been around now for over a decade. And it's now become like a fashion statement where everybody says they're doing it. The reality is that many of the customers were doing elements of it, and vendors were doing elements of it anyways, right? I mean, there's nothing really new there other than their specific process, but the actual outputs were the same. And I think that's a healthy thing. I think that ultimately that's going to be good. The only thing I'm cautious about with these types of hands-on programs is every customer is not going to be able to get that, right? Like, Microsoft is, not to pick on Microsoft, but any of these vendors is not going to go to a mid-market account that's driving $200 million a year in revenue to do one of these. They're going to the people who are going to spend $200 million on you, right?
Yes.
So I do think that that's a little bit worrisome, that the big guys are getting a level of enablement and capability that's only going to make them potentially more competitive, and the mid-market guys are going to get left behind. And that is something I am slightly worried about.
Yeah.
But the flip side of it is that, to your point, it is good that somebody's getting their hands held, because this stuff could get easily, I don't want to say out of control, but people could get out in front of their skis and not necessarily understand what's going to happen.
Well, I love what you're saying, and I don't want to keep dragging this, but I'm going off what you said, because I'm fully aligned there with you. I'll take this a step further. Every company you talk to, every show you go to, every event you kind of sit through, you see this vision of agentic AI and autonomy, and it is all kind of the story and the vision all lines up to, if not hyperscalers, companies that behave like hyperscalers.
Right.
So, call it Wall Street versus Main Street, right? Some company is going to make a mint worth of money when they can take that concept of kind of enabling the large enterprise and make it consumable for the mid-market through a series of button clicks or a series of drag and drop kind of capabilities. Whoever can consumerize agentic AI for that volume market is going to be cashing checks from here to eternity, and they're going to be very large checks. But nobody seems to want to pay attention to it yet. Everybody wants to go capture Microsoft. Nobody wants to capture Jason Anderson Inc. Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Now, my only comment to that is yet, right? At some point, at some point, the vanguard and the elite there will be a trickle down into the mid-market where people start to realize that they'll have something that is consumable enough. I don't necessarily I think that's a functionality of the consumability of the technology. And
it's too nascent. Market's too nascent. It's going to take time. But more, man, when it materializes.
Whew,
that's when you're going to see that. All right. Anyway, this is a fun one to talk. I love talking about this stuff, by the way. It's so fun, kind of.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. So let's move on to the boring stuff. I'm just kidding. Computex, my not so hot take. It's not so hot because it's been a week. In my research note just published a few minutes ago. So I got to travel to Taipei last week to take in Computex. For those watching at home, Computex has traditionally been a consumer-focused electronics show. Think of it as like CES, but more devices, lots more devices, and more of the kind of cool silicon kind of stuff. But it's recently turned into kind of over the last couple of years, more of a data center and kind of AI story, just like everything else, right? So I went on, in full disclosure, Intel paid for me to go and kind of take in what they're talking about. But I got to experience a lot, sat through a few keynotes, talked to a few different companies, and I'm going to, in not 90 seconds, but in a few minutes or less, kind of walk you through my big high-level takeaways, okay?
Very cool.
First is fragmentation. And fragmentation not being a bad thing. So forever in the data center, we have talked about Intel and we've talked about AMD. And if you're talking to finance folks, or you were talking to engineering houses, maybe you talk about AMD and NVIDIA for EDA or real-time high-frequency trading, so on and so forth, right? GPU enabled. But it was 2, 3 chip makers that you talked about. The world is changing. And by the way, through training, it was still kind of NVIDIA and AMD and kind of and Intel and everybody else. Introducing inference and fragmentation enters the market, right? NVIDIA acquires Grok, but doesn't acquire them. They pretty much acquire them. Intel does this strategic partnership with SambaNova. Tenstorrent enters the market, risk-based. Cerebras goes out at $101 billion value, $101 billion valuation on their IPO day. Vera gets introduced. AGI CPU from ARM gets introduced. Qualcomm has the A100, A200. They introduced their ARM chip. Sci5 introduces their RISC-V, RISC-V, whoever, depending on what camp you're in, chip. There's so much fragmentation going on out there, and there's more to come, because when you look at inference across the enterprise, there are so many different types of, it's not a workload, it's so many different types of workload depending on what you're doing, and it requires very specialized silicon to deliver optimized performance at the lowest power. So while we think the world is starting to shift, it's only begun, and there's a lot more coming. And there's a company out there that's worth taking a look at called Furiosa, based out of South Korea. They build their own inference chip. They started a couple of years ago, and they've sold into Samsung and a couple of other large-scale companies in Korea. They just signed a partnership with Broadcom to do a specialized next-generation chip that I suspect is going to be moved and positioned into the hyperscale space. But they're an example of a company that has, quote-unquote, come out of nowhere to gain real relevance in this market. So more fragmentation coming. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But it is going to cry for some control plane at the enterprise level that can help manage all of this stuff from a single platform.
So, let me jump on the bandwagon here with you.
Yeah.
So while you were at Computex, I was at Build, and I got to meet with Scott Gallagher, who runs Azure, like runs it, right? And we were talking about this very topic because they had just announced Cobalt 200 that day. Yep. So there's new Cobalt coming. They also had some announcements around Maya and Quantum and things like that. And I said, how's it going with the uptake of custom silicon? Because my thought was that, you're building custom silicon and you're getting those, Microsoft specific workloads put on it with, maybe your Outlook and SharePoint services are going to be made for it. And I was like, and then you're going to maybe get some, with something like some of these other technologies, you might get net new workloads, like somebody builds it for you, like when a new chip comes out and Anthropic says, "Oh, I'll work with this chip plus all with CUDA," right? So they go in all on it. And I said, "But what about like the rank and file IT shop? Like, is it for them, right, or is this just for hyperscalers and big companies?" And the answer was, "Oh no." With AI migration tools and with the capability to do this, and with all the automation at the code layer.
Yep.
It's much easier now to move off of x86 and your legacy workloads to this new stuff. And it's much easier, especially for CPUs, because Graviton and ARM have been out in the market for so long that the path is now well worn. Like Microsoft effectively said, we weren't the first, but we're getting the benefits of the first people who did deliver ARM in the cloud. And now we know enough to be able to help a customer move to it very easily. And you're talking, even at like the general purpose computing in the cloud, you're talking, you could save 10 to 15%, which isn't crap when you're deploying at scale, right? That could be potentially a ton of money. So you're absolutely right as to what's coming. But what's interesting is that we're kind of already getting there, and it's only going to get bigger and better over time. Yeah. The other thing was that Microsoft did a almost 3-hour-long keynote at Build, which is strange. But what's even stranger is the first hour was all infrastructure. It was all the chips. It was Windows. It was the new Surfaces, the new dev box they built. They were showing off the NVIDIA relationship on this next generation laptop stuff. All of that stuff, I'm sitting there going, why is this at a dev show? And it's like, oh, I get it. back 20, 30 years ago, developers actually had to care about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and then the cloud came and they stopped, and virtualization in cloud basically was like, oh, I don't have to care about this anymore.
Yep.
Well, guess what? Now you do. But the good news is that AI development tools can help, right? So you don't have to know it at the level of our forefathers, but nonetheless, you still have to know it to some level, whereas 6 months ago, maybe you didn't. So yeah, it's a changing world. And on the cloud side, they're kind of ready for it. They're in good shape.
Yeah, that general purpose computing side with ARM, you're right. It's been here for a while. In fact, over the last few years, over half of the new instances launched on AWS have been based on Graviton.
Correctamundo.
Yeah, and ARM in the last Mercury Research, who tracks chips, their last report, it just dropped, I think, last week. ARM is now 17.7% of the data center CPU market. I should say in shipments, 17% of shipments into the data center market. It's double from what it was last year. And it's only going to continue to grow. And that, to me, that brings me to my second point, which is there is pressure being built on traditional x86. And I'm going to make sure I am super clear on, I am not saying that x86 is going away. So all of you, and I am an ex-AMD guy, so I am a big fan of x86. Right. Put my kids through college. But there is a pressure, and it's a good pressure, on x86 being forced by companies like ARM, like NVIDIA, like Qualcomm, and the CSPs to be better, leaner, faster, quicker. When you look at ARM's AGI CPU and you look at Vera from NVIDIA, these are specifically, they have architectural tweaks that were put into the ISA, or into the architecture. I'm sorry, not the ISA, into the architecture to deliver better agentic AI, flat out better agentic AI than x86 can deliver. This is not a power story, a power efficiency story. It really isn't. We're past that. When you're at 288 cores or 192 cores or whatever, the power is pretty much the same, and you have to dial up the frequency to get the performance. You start hitting the same, in the ballpark of the same envelopes. It's not about power efficiency anymore. It's about tuned performance. And ARM has an advantage over x86 in that it doesn't have to worry about that virtualized database. It can support it, but its target is that AI environment that it is going to support. That is what NVIDIA designed to. That is what ARM designed to. That's what Qualcomm designed to. So this is going to put pressure on Intel and AMD to really kind of go back and look at, not Zen 6 or not Xeon 7, but next generation, as you get into instruction, as you get into discrete silicon and acceleration engines, how do you start to map to that kind of performance profile while supporting all of these legacy enterprise workloads you've been supporting for the last 30 years. It's a really cool story. I think it's going to make everybody better. And I think x86 market's going to grow. I think the ARM market's going to grow because there's an insatiable demand. But I think ARM pressure is fantastic for the entire industry.
Yeah, and like I said, it's also one of these things where it will go full circle to a certain degree, right? And you're already starting to see it with agents. You're starting to see kind of people say, well, agents are now, it was always training and inference, now it's training, inference, and agents. And when you look at that chart, the capability of the CPU favors the agents, whereas on the training side, it favors the GPU. Inferencing is kind of still also GPU, but a different sort of GPU. So you're now starting to see kind of real clarity in terms of also, to your point, as to the actual usage of this stuff. You can't just throw piles of processors at it and it's just micro code changes. It's got to be more than that, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I saw demos from, they were, I can't say who, because they were shown under NDA. That's sorry for the hedging there. I saw demos from two different silicon vendors, where they showed kind of, when you looked at traditional, like it's been around forever. When you look at kind of traditional inference, and there was mapping, there was 1:4, 1:8 CPU to GPU ratio for kind of what you were seeing out in the marketplace, and they were showing the impact of agentic and that ratio coming down from 1:8 to 1:4 to 1:2 to about 1:1.
Yeah.
Because of the work that the CPUs are going to be doing in this agentic world. So to what you're saying, agentic is not just kind of introducing new variables. It's truly kind of bringing the CPU back into key focus for the AI play.
Yep, for the AI stack. Yeah, cool. Well, we're coming up on time, my man.
I'm giving you one more.
Okay.
Sorry, this. I talk about that, and this is something I really want to get your opinion on too, because you alluded to it, and that is, we've seen ARM challenging x86 in the data center. I think NVIDIA introduced its N1 CPU for clients. They obviously have all these windows or these window wins out the gate, right? While Qualcomm did all the hard work of hardening Windows for ARM, I think NVIDIA is going to be the market mover. And I think if you're going to see a big impact on x86 share, I believe it's going to be interesting to see on the client. I don't want to say I believe ARM is going to eat x86 lunch in the client, but man, I think there's going to be some.
So
yeah.
I'll give you one piece of thinking on this, because it is interesting that, again, we were at Build, developer heavy event, right? And the second day of Build, the Microsoft team said, hey, we want to take the analysts not to the Build event yet. We're going to go to another location in San Francisco. We want to show you something. Okay, cool. So we go to this place. It's fantastic. It's a nice building and facility. The room we're in is great. And they gave us demos of the new NVIDIA chipset. When you were at Computex, Jensen got up and announced this new chipset from Microsoft. They showed it on a Surface. The graphics capability they loaded up like SolidWorks, right? They loaded up SolidWorks, and they showed how you could do things with SolidWorks. The graphics capability was unbelievable. They showed some gaming stuff that looked like nothing I'd seen before. So I'm just going to say that what you're going to see I think with the client, you're going to see this kind of explosion in the middle, which is the high end is going to keep getting higher. What they showed us was pretty unbelievable for a Surface laptop. And you're going, okay, what's that Surface laptop going to ultimately cost, right? That's a high-end system, right? That's a gaming box. Then you've got the low end, which is, is a Qualcomm or ARM-driven laptop going to be eating the lunch of the tablets and then, going after that low-end business. But I don't know about its ability at the high end, because what I saw from that NVIDIA demo was pretty outrageous.
Well, the problem Qualcomm had was actually it was a high-end chip, and they didn't have a volume mover when they launched. Is it Dragonfly? When they launched it with Dell, it was a great chip.
Yeah,
but they didn't have a chip that played in the price point that was a volume.
Right.
Mover. What I find most interesting is consumers more than data center folks. They're going on their experience, right? They don't care anymore about Intel versus AMD versus that's the gamers. But everyone knows how cool NVIDIA is, right? If you can do that really great experience at the same price as you can get, man, it's going to be fun to watch. Anyway,
the other thing that what Microsoft did that was pretty slick was they now have a new profile for developers, and what it did is it gives you all the developer utilities. It is the clearest example of Windows saying, okay, we get that Mac is the developer desktop. And they added all the stuff that they didn't have in the mix. They added utilities, tools, everything preloaded. They made the interface a lot cleaner and slicker. They made it more adjustable, all in Windows 11. They're like, you can go to GitHub and get this configuration, and I'm not going to say it looks like a Mac. It doesn't, but it gets the software side and the user experience side closer to that of a Mac person. Yeah. And if you're going to be using agents all day anyways, how important is that user experience anyway going forward? And then you have it with this Rockstar GPU setup. I think the client space is going to get very, very interesting in the next 12 months for all these reasons, Matt.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Sorry we went over a little bit. This is
I know.
So much to talk about.
It's 5:30 in Boston, man. I got to get to a beer.
Hey, are you going anywhere next week? You're going to AWS, is that correct?
New York City AWS Summit, and then then I'll be home for 2 months back. As a Boston guy, I got to tell you, I do have a skybox at the Yankees Wednesday night next week with AWS, so I'm pretty excited about that. Not the Red Sox. Red Sox just left town. Red Sox were there last weekend, so I'll actually get a good game in with the Yankees.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man. I
think it's Philly. It might be Philly. Might be interleague. I don't know. Oh, it's the White Sox. White Sox.
Oh, White Sox are playing well, actually. So
yeah, so that'd be all right.
I'm so disheartened by the Red Sox that I don't even want to talk about it. I was so brash at the beginning of the season, and they've done nothing but disappoint me. So I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to be at HPE Discover next week. If y'all are around, make sure you look me up, and we can catch up with Jason in New York City and avoid Yankee Stadium while he's there, because he'll probably create some trouble, and I don't know. You don't want to be associated with trouble.
I'm wearing my Mets hat. That's what I'm doing.
There you go. All right. Be careful.
All right.
Hey, listen.
Have a great weekend.
We'll do it again next week or in a couple weeks. Thanks, sir.
Later.